Today, we're going to understand how do we go through any kind of a security architecture interviews, right? I do conduct interviews in my day-to-day job. Whenever we hire someone, uh, we try to gauge in some of the important fundamental aspects just to see the preparedness of a person, whether they're going to be a right fit in the security architecture or not. Okay. Along with that, I'm going to share some of the insights of what kind of questions which are being asked in the industry. I'll also share some of the questions that were asked to me as when I have interviewed myself in the current role, current position, right? And we will try and see get some insight of what are the important fundamental pillars that are needed for anyone to be or to become a security architect, right? So let's get cracking on. The evolving architect. What are the roles and responsibilities that an architect does? Architecture is a very niche domain in security, and not only in security, right? Because when you think or talk to anyone into security, especially if someone is a newbie or a fresher or joining the industry for the very first time, for them the perception of security would be a guy in the hoodie sitting in the dark room almost beyond the midnight doing something on the black screen with the green and blue font codes popping up. Well, that I think the movies are to be blamed because the security folks doesn't look like that, right? The security folks essentially look like you and I, what we exactly do, right? And within security, most of the domains, if you talk about, they would be, if you ask anyone, what do you want to choose into security? What do you want to become into security? So if the first and foremost answer would be, oh, well, I want to become a penetration tester. I want to become a hacker. I want to become maybe get into the blue team. I want to take care of the incident response, threat hunting, threat intel, all those fancy words and everything. Well, that actually makes sense because those are very appealing, right? People getting into slightly more blue collar, they would get into, oh, I want to become a governance risk compliance expert or SME, GRC expert, or maybe someone want to get into the identity and access management, or maybe someone want to get into the auditing, compliance, all of those things. We all have heard about it. Nobody knows or understands or want to become an architect because primarily people little bit, I'm not talking about you all, but in general people lack little bit of awareness. What does an architect do, right? When I the very first time I got introduction to the architecture piece, that was 15 years ago, when I was going through one of the trainings on payment card industry, PCI DSS, right? There's a CPI-SI certification. So there I looked into the very first architecture diagram of my life, where they were explaining how exactly the transaction happens through payment gateways, how exactly it gets approved from the merchant, and then it gets uh, remitted by the banks and so on. So all those things were the very first introduction to me on the architecture. And I was like, oh, wow, that's a complex thing to do, to design, to review, any of those things. None of that thing made sense to me. But gradually, when I landed myself into the architecture role, oh, well, that was a little bit of an accident how I landed. Maybe a topic for some other time. I'll talk about that. But I was told that these are the things you're supposed to do. So, what exactly an architect does? One of the primary responsibilities of an architect is to design the patterns. What is a pattern? A pattern is anything that is technology agnostic, something that can be implemented as a repeatable process. Allow me to explain. What does it mean? Let's say you have a requirement. You have a requirement that your organization wants to enable a file transfer from your internal system to external system. That is the requirement what is given to us or to anyone in the organization. Because essentially, where exactly an architect fits best, an architect fits best into the, if I have to explain in the form of SDLC, right? If I quickly go ahead and explain things from an SDLC perspective, the high level SDLC phases are like requirement gathering, uh, design phase, development phase, you have your testing phase, and then you have the deployment, which is also called as like ops and maintenance, right? Where does the architecture fits best? It is in the design phase. This is where the architecture piece comes in, right? So someone needs, there's a requirement of letting a file transfer from internal system to internet or external entities, right? There is a need of transferring the file. Now, when it comes to an architecture piece, we will try to understand how we have been doing this in past. There must be some kind of a ways we have been doing this. So people might say, oh, we simply send out an email, right? We send out an email to whosoever needs the file, but that's a manual process. Now, from an from an architecture perspective, what an architect would do, architect would establish a pattern. There is a new use case that have been identified where there is a recurrent need of transferring the file from internal system to the external system. What is the best repeatable process that we can identify? That's what patterns are. Patterns means once it has been identified and established, that can be reused over and over and over and again without having any kind of a drawback. So what we do, we identify that, okay, if there's a file transfer, maybe we can leverage some kind of a file transfer protocol. Maybe we can leverage, let's say, SFTP. SFTP is secure file transfer protocol, where file transfer happens along with the SSH. We use secure shell for establishing the connection, authentication, and so on, right? That's where the patterns come in. This will be an enterprise architecture pattern. But what's the role of a security in it? The pattern that was established, it was from a enterprise perspective, right? At an enterprise level, we have given or delivered the ways or the methods of transferring the file, but how do we do it securely? We identified SFTP is a good way to proceed ahead. Or maybe we want to transfer the file, but how do we secure it? SFTP uses SSH. So people might say, oh, well, it is using SSH, it is secure. But how are we securing SSH itself? SSH is the particular protocol that we use. It's a layer 7 protocol, right? So SSH need to be secured. There are encryption keys which are used. How often you're rotating the keys, right? There are standards along key rotation. So NIST recommends the key rotation to be done. Uh, the recommendation is to be done like every 90 days, 30 days. But as an organization, there must be some kind of a technical standards that you have created, the security standards. Your patterns must be in line with these security standards, what you have built. That's where security architects come in. So security architect, or you can also refer it as enterprise security architect, they will help you in developing these security patterns. Someone says, well, we are bringing different new solutions from third party. We are onboarding new solutions. Can you provide, how do we ensure that everyone in the organization is able to authenticate? So what we will do, we will develop authentication pattern. So from a security perspective, the rule of a thumb is if there is an authentication that's going to happen, we would say, go ahead and do a single sign-on, right? So a single sign-on would be repeatable, reusable, technology agnostic, irrespective whether you are using any kind of a SaaS, any kind of an internally developed solution, whether it is hosted on AWS, Azure, GCP, no matter what. Every user-based authentication need to adhere to single sign-on. What is this? This is a authentication pattern. And you can go on and on and on and on. Depending on the use case, first of all, you get a requirement, you start designing the patterns around it. That is a very important task for a security architect, or I would say an architect, right? Security architect, solution architect, domain architect, enterprise architect, whatever you want to call, that's one of the crucial jobs of an architect. Another aspect of an architect is to design the solution. We might call ourselves security architects. Security architecture is about reviewing any kind of a design. It's more about conducting an assessment whether the design is in line with the given technical security standards, policies, whether it is meeting the enterprise patterns or not. This is of what most of the roles or the time that would be spent as an architect. You would be assessing it. But at the same time, you are a solution architect as well. What is a solution architect? A solution architect is someone who's going to design the solution based on the given architecture principles or the architecture patterns. So if I have to give you a sort of a hierarchy, right? There's an enterprise architecture that sits at the top, right? Within the enterprise architects, you have various solution architects. Solution architects are the one who design the solution. When I say design the solution means they are given the requirements from the business, your own customers, right? Whosoever you are, you would be building the design. Now, how do we start building the design? That's a slightly detailed discussion that we need to adhere to certain frameworks like TOGAF, or maybe if in case if you want to address these certain elements of SAPSA and from a security architecture perspective, those elements need to be incorporated. So there is another design principle that is called as 4C, like you have a container, component, context, and everything. So you get that particular requirement, you understand the context, and you start building the design. Design is essentially describing how your solution would look like in the two dimensions, right? You have a new HR solution, you have a new ERP solution, you have a new, let's say, CRM solution, or you have a security solution like a PAM, IAM, SOAR, SIM, whatever it is, right? How exactly that particular solution would look like on papers, describing each and every components, how exactly they will be integrating, how exactly the connections will be initiated, how exactly the data flow would happen. Everything need to be incorporated in one image. That's what we call it as design, right? That's where the solution architects come in. So you are a security architect for your organization, but you are a solution architect for your security function, which means if there is a need of designing a new solution in the security, let's say your your management, your leadership wants that, well, we want to design, we want to initiate a DevSecOps culture in the organization. We need an architect who can help in designing the entire DevSecOps pipeline. How do we secure our DevOps pipeline? How do we ensure that, well, we have a need of bringing in some of the open source solutions, some of the open source libraries, maybe we might end up using some of the container images. How we can ensure that the entire pipeline is assured? Well, an architect will start designing the solution, right? Designing the entire overview. It's like they will they will be able to provide a single pane view of what needs to be delivered. That's where we consume the requirement, understand the context, and we design the solution. The third role is about the assessment. We spoke briefly about the assessment. Assessment is you have a design in front of you, you need to assess it, you need to evaluate it. This is mostly from the business side. You might be working for a bank, you might be working for a healthcare, or maybe hospitality, defense sector. aerospace, retail, fintech, investment company, whatever it is, right? The business, the core business is something that is your customer for you. So someone is trying to bring in a new, let's say, a sales and marketing solution, or maybe they are trying to onboard a new investment solution, or maybe they want to onboard some kind of a clinic payment system, something like that. They already have their own solution architects, their business solution architects. They are someone who's going to design the solution, but you would be reviewing it. So a security architect review those designs, understand what could go wrong from this particular design in case if there are any security related requirements, any kind of a gaps. These things are given as a feedback to the solution architect. A security architect will provide the feedback that, well, your solution doesn't do authentication with single sign-on. Your solution doesn't have a proper API security. Your solution doesn't have key rotation, whatever it could be, right? That's what the role or that's what the job of a security architect is. They assess the design, they identify any kind of architecture related security concerns, and they will identify it and articulate the risk and communicate this to the stakeholders, right? So what we have covered three important KRAs, key responsibility areas for a security architect, or in general, enterprise security architect. They need to get involved in defining the patterns. They need to get involved in designing the solution. They need to get involved into reviewing the designs. All of the three things are the core job and responsibilities of the architecture, right? Last week or last week, I posted an article on LinkedIn that one of the common misconception in the industries about hiring an architect is the job responsibilities. When I read it, somewhere I find it quite hurtful. Hurtful in a sense because I end up noticing that anyone who's writing that job description, either they have never been into architecture or they don't understand what is an architecture, right? They expect people to have a very in-depth, thorough understanding of, or maybe they would expect you to write down the code. They actually prefer people who have the hands-on programming experience. As an architect or the architects that I work with, nobody codes. Is it needed to understand the code? Nice if you do that, right? If you can understand the code, nice. But are you supposed to know how to code? Not at all. I do coding only because I have an interest of doing that. Is it needed from a job perspective? Not at all. I have not even a single role required me to perform an programming in order to deliver a project. I have delivered some of the automation project, but that was not one of my core areas. That was not an architecture. What the job descriptions require is maybe a security engineer, not an architect. An architect is someone who needs to get involved in the design phase, not in the development, not in the testing, not in the deployment. So if you take the roles and responsibility from a RACI perspective, RACI, I hope everybody is aware, responsible, accountable, consulted, and informed, right? You are responsible and accountable at the design phase. Rest on every other phases, you might be consulted, you might be informed, which is okay. But you're not accountable for these deliverables. Very, very important, right? In case if any organization is forcing an architect to do these jobs, maybe they have hired someone and expectation is to deliver literally everything, which is unrealistic, right? So that's where the core pillars that we have from an architecture perspective. What are the key skill sets that we need to inculcate in ourselves so that we can actually be Bang on the cracking the interviews. What are the pillars of success? I'm going to keep it very simple. Then I'll move into some of the interesting elements about it, right? One of the core elements for being an architect is to have the idea and knowledge of your domain. Now, what domain I'm referring to? I'm referring to security. As an architect and as a security architect, or you want to call it as an enterprise security architect, whatever you want to call it, right? As a security architect, people have an expectation from them that they have very versatile knowledge of literally everything in security. You might have heard about the phrase jack of all trades, master of none. If I hope everyone would have heard about that phrase, right? But that's an incomplete phrase. Do you know this? The complete phrase is jack of all trades, master of none is better than being master of one, right? What does it mean? This is exactly what it defines you to become an architect. You are expected to be a jack of all trades. Nobody is looking for an SME of one thing. Nobody is asking you to be really, really good at networks. Nobody's looking for you to be really, really good at identity and access management, or maybe just application security or whatever it is, right? People expect you to know the fundamentals of literally everything because an architect wears multiple hats. I start my day with maybe in one of the meetings I'm supposed to take care of addressing any kind of maybe business related capabilities, right? There are business that I'm supporting and they need a new solution and I'm trying to help them in what is a secure way of delivering it. In the next meeting, I'm supposed to understand how does the blockchain works, right? What are the security concerns around blockchain? What are the various uh, architecture view that I can provide from blockchain? The one moment I was looking into, let's say, a file transfer services, the next moment I'm looking into how do we secure the blockchain, entire blockchain related. So there is in the blockchain, you must be aware that there are many elements. You have the uh, you have the oracle in place, then you have the various kind of smart contracts. You need to address the security concerns there. And in the next meeting, you are trying to evaluate some kind of a or addressing some of the zero trust network architecture. And in the upcoming one, I have to prepare myself for the AI security. They need to have some kind of a patterns on the AI security. So if I start becoming an expert on everything what I'm talking about, it will take another 2 or 3 decades to be there, right? And by the time I'm going to be an expert on, let's say, blockchain, AI, zero trust, and everything, these things might be obsolete. 10 years ago, we didn't had a very versatile use case of blockchain. 15 years ago, we didn't had a very versatile use case of AI. 20 years back, we didn't had a very versatile use case of cloud, right? And I'm not counting the IoTs and other kind of elements. The moment you start mastering one thing, there is a technology that is going to evolve that will be replaced. That shouldn't affect us because for us, data remains the same. The core principle of confidentiality, integrity, availability, they would remain constant. They doesn't changes. So if you want to be a good security architect, just have the foundational understanding. It's been 17 years I've been into this industry. I'm still recollecting, talking all the things what I did on my day one of my very first job as the uh, mail administrator and directory services that right I started with my career with identity and access management role where I was taking care of the server recertification, deploying all those kind of a workspaces and so on. It was a technical role. And but when I talk about any kind of discussions around secure email relay or maybe taking care of the I managing the identities at an architecture level, I still go back to the basics, right? These things never change and will never change. So you need to have the great fundamental understanding of everything in security. Next one is your business knowledge. A lot of people believe security architecture or architecture is a very, very glamorous role. Oh, spoiler alert, it is not. It's sad to know that you're not going to do anything fancy stuff what people in pen testing or blue teaming or threat hunting or those people do. Nothing. You probably won't work in even a single tool in your entire architecture. You would probably use only like Visio, maybe Draw.io, or maybe PowerPoint. That's it, right? Nothing else. You won't be accessing or using any of the tools and technologies. So, architecture is not glamorous. Your job is to know your business first, whatever the business it is, right? You might be from healthcare, you might be from investment, you might be from banking, hospitality, restaurant business, whatever it is. Understand what your organization do at a very high level. Unless you know that, you won't be able to provide necessary feedback. You won't be able to acknowledge their pain areas, right? I'll give you uh, one of the practical use case from one of my previous roles. There was a need of getting some kind of alternate file transfer mechanism. I said, why can't you use the one that we have at an enterprise level? Well, they have a fear that what if this enterprise level file transfer services might fail? Well, we have the criticality for that, right? You have the criticality for that. Like if it is highly critical, you would have the redundant systems and the failover mechanism. You would have the defined RTO and RPO. I said that enterprise level file transfer mechanism has been defined as the highest criticality that we can offer. Why are you so much worried? Well, there is a need of a business because the enterprise level file transfer services might end up recovering in 2 hours, but we need something to be delivered in 30 minutes, which is more critical than whatever the highest level of criticality that your organization might be thinking about. Now, I need to support this only because I need to understand why it is important from a business perspective, right? So if you don't have that fundamental understanding of your business, what they do, why they do, how they do, you might still be able to deliver your required services from an architecture perspective, but they might not be fruitful. See, what happens if I don't have the business knowledge? They will ask me of that I want to achieve something. If it in case it is slightly deviating from the standards, I would say, oh no, you can't do this. Or maybe if you want to do this, take a risk, right? But knowing the purpose of why exactly it is required to deliver something which is even more important, like a mission critical thing from a business perspective, we might have to understand the aspect. In case if something is being done which is deviating from the given standards, we will still document it as a risk. We'll still document it as a deviation, but we will understand what are the efforts that we can provide from a security recommendation perspective so that they can at least get the job done, right? Knowing your business is very important. So in future, if you are ever being interviewed, right, or in case if you're currently working as an architect, please make sure that you go through and understand like a bird's eye view of how the business operating model looks like, right? If it is a manufacturing company, how do they manufacture things? What are the various departments that they integrate with? What are the various services, technologies? At least at a high level, you need to know that. As a security architect or as an enterprise security architect, we must know the risk elements. It is important that we identify the risk. Understanding the risk would be very, very crucial. And I always say this to everyone, not only to the architects, but anyone who joins the security as an industry. I always say this: try and see the things from an attacker's perspective. If you are good with breaking things, you will automatically be good with fixing things. And I say this to everyone. And I genuinely don't hesitate in giving this as a recommendation that if you find out a way how we can compromise certain things, that's where you need to fix that. That's the loophole you need to close, right? So when you're reviewing any kind of a design, if it is if you realize that this is the possible thing that can actually go wrong, point it out. Make sure that it is documented. Even in case someone says, well, you don't have these standards documented around it, then why are you saying that it is a risk? See, these standards are given based on it's driven through the policies, right? Policies are driven through the business objectives or the regulatory requirements. But whatever the solution that you're reviewing, they might not be as per the given policies or whatever it is. So in case if there is any kind of a deviation, you need to point it out, right? And not only the security related concerns, even the architecture related concerns. There are certain architecture principles, right? You might have heard about things like secure by design. Secure by design means there are certain principles, like, for example, you need to enforce the principle of least privilege, you need to enforce the principle of separation of duties, asset classification, keep it simple, and all this kind of thing, right? Let's take an example of keep it simple. We also call it as a KISS, keep it simple, silly, right? That's a core principle of an architecture. What does it mean? You need to have a simplified design. The more complex you design, the more difficult it is to secure. For example, in case if your design have certain, let's say there are two cloud service providers, they need to have some kind of a data being transmitted from each other. However, your architecture design requires you to get the data into some kind of an on-prem system, and from there, it is re-uploaded to the destination system. So this is a cloud service provider one, cloud service provider two, right? The first question we would ask, why can't they talk to each other? Why do you have a need of bringing the data on-prem and then resending it? Unless you are doing some kind of a data enrichment here. You are adding certain values, removing certain values, then it all makes sense. But if you're simply copying it and then uploading it, oh, I think it's a bad design. It's a poor design. So this is an architectural risk. Their architecture have some of the principles. Some of the principles, like whenever you want to bring in a new solution, first of all, see, is there anything that you can reuse? So reuse before buy before build. Automation is the strategy, cloud is the approach. Whatever the principles that we have, in case if they are not being followed, there is an architectural risk. Sometimes we also call it as technical debts. We need to identify those things as well. One of the very, very important traits that I personally see in an architect is the way they communicate effectively. Effective communication doesn't have to be usage of very fancy words, having great vocabulary, doesn't require any of those things. The effective communication means articulation of the things in a simple way, simple terms that everyone can understand, especially people who are from non-technical background, business people. At least they should understand, right? That's the core requirement from the perspective of your effective communication. Okay, so while I interview people, I go ahead and ask some of the simple questions, which I'm going to show you. Some of the questions that I have asked to the candidates, or I have been asked while I was being interviewed in some of the organizations in the past. I'm going to give you some of the hints around that. But key aspect is that the architect need or must have an ability to communicate effectively. All right. Let's jump into the very important section, and probably you will have fun around it. Is about what I would ask if I have to hire a security architect. These are some of the topics that I feel they could be relevant. I mean, it's not these are not the only questions that I have asked candidates, but these are also some of the questions which I have been asked while I have applied for the roles like your senior security architect in any organization, someone who's being hired who have the industry experience of 15 plus years, right? So the very first question, and it is my personal favorite, explain a complicated topic of your choice as you're explaining to a 10-year-old kid or a 5-year-old kid. This is a very, very important question. This shows an ability of an architect to break down any complicated topic and explain it to your stakeholders, your business, your customers. Most of the times, you would be talking to people who have not seen anything in security. Forget about security, they are not even technical guys, right? These are the people who could be doing sales on their days. These are the people who might be selling health insurance. You never know, right? These are the people you need to talk to. In case if you end up explaining complicated topics like your PKI, single sign on, identity governance, zero trust, right? If you can explain this as you're talking to a 10-year-old kid or a 5-year-old child, and if they go back happy, oh, wow, I learned zero trust today. This is exactly what I wanted to learn. If you are able to do that, that's where an architecture is. That's what one of the key traits an architect is looking for, right? I'll tell you one of my personal experiences. The current role where I am right now, right? I was asked the very first question was explain TCP handshake as you are explaining it to a 10-year-old child, right? Everybody understands TCP handshake. TCP handshake is when any two system wants to establish the communication, right? So they send out a SYN. The system, if it is available for available for accepting the connection, they respond with acknowledgement. So they send out a SYNAC, and the client system would send acknowledgement, right? How would you go there and explain it to the 10-year-old kid, right? So you can just simply play catch with your kid. Hey, kiddo, are you ready to play catch? Right? Oh yes, I'm ready to play catch. Here's the ball, and I'm about to send out a throw the ball, whatever it is, right? You can go ahead and take any analogies or any kind of references, but try to break it down simple, right? Next question that again, one of the uh, very interesting question that this, and there is a purpose of each and every question. There is a reason why I have chosen these questions, right? The reason because they actually toggles the thought process. They forces people to get the creativity out of an architect. What is an architect without creativity? It's a boring architect, right? Your architecture needs to be interesting, isn't it, right? So, what is the most common challenge that a security architect faces during assessing any solution design? What is the most common challenge? You can go ahead and tell them that these are the few things. Uh, these are the few things you can recommend that your data in transit is not encrypted. Your data in transit doesn't have data validation. You're using a weak cipher. You're not retaining the keys at all. These things you can easily provide. But the struggle comes in how do you convince that these are the necessary things? If the business is reluctant, oh no, I do not want to do single sign on because I want to have that authority of provisioning and deprovisioning access on my own. I want to have that authority that I would reset people's password. How do you convince a kind of an adamant business? It's like talking to a teenage child, right? If you have a teenage kids at home, right? It's like convincing them not to use the digital gadgets for very long, not to use Instagram if you're not permitted, if you're not 16, right? It's literally like talking to a teenage people. So it's not about the it's not about the technical challenge. It's more about the people challenge, navigating through the people challenges because people are reluctant. People are reluctant to deliver certain things. People are reluctant to do certain things differently. And if you ask them to do it, it becomes a chaos, right? Design a solution if a given problem statement and address the security requirements that's been shown in your design. This is like a case study, right? We normally conduct case studies. Case studies will give you a complete narrative of the thought process that an architect brings in. You give a scenario, see, so this will give the perspective of both solution architect as well as the security architect. How good they are in designing the solution, how well they have understood your requirement, how well they have demonstrated them in the design. There are many type of designs that you have, right? There are uh, your high level design, low level design, logical context, system context, data flow, integration, all those kind of design. How well an architect is versed with these kind of designs, because each and every design has a different perspective, different purpose. Logical context will show something else, system context will show something else, right? So it is very important that an architect understand these things and how well they're incorporating these capabilities within your designs. And at the same time, if you have requested or if you are being asked to demonstrate the security requirements, like role-based access control, single sign-on, least privilege, separation of duties, data in transit encryption, key management, you need to showcase that. How do you develop architecture patterns? Architecture patterns could be anything. We spoke about the patterns on our very first slide, right? Something that is repeatable, something that is technology agnostic. Nowadays, AI is taking care of everything, right? The good part is architecture is still one of the domains which has not been touched with the AI, at least to a full scale. A lot of things where AI is being used in security everywhere. Architecture is the only thing which has not been completely leveraged with the AI, which is a nice thing, right? I'm not saying that it will make people's job redundant. It is just going to, because an architecture is something you need pair of eyes. You can't have an AI tool to do the design reviews for you. They're going to give you some of the holistic views, ideas, and so on. But it's not something what a quality that will be delivered by a security architect. But AI in the organizations are being used heavily, right? How do we secure it? So you have a user layer, you have an interface layer, you have the uh, your whenever the prompts are being delivered, then you have the APIs gateway, prompt firewalls, inference engine, validation of the output, or output filtering, reduction of any kind of a sensitive data, uh, modern inversion attack, or any prompt injection attacks, and all this kind of thing. These elements, how do you define it? How do you draw a pattern around it? These are good questions, right? So in case if you are preparing for an architecture interview, architecture related roles, these are some of the very crucial things that one should know, right? Your organization plans to, sorry about the typos. The presentation was prepared yesterday in a very hush hush because I've been constantly delivering some of the sessions. So it takes immense amount of effort that what to put. So please excuse my some of the mistakes there in the presentation. That actually shows that AI was not used in creating these presentations, right? So your organization plans to implement zero trust. What are the various capabilities you must ensure to achieve this objective? Zero trust is also kind of a buzzword. It's a kind of a target that every organization intends to achieve. So how do you ensure that your zero trust is achieved? You need to take care of the network segmentation, micro segmentation. You have to address about your granular access control. You need to ensure that your identities are secured just in time, or your least privilege. You also want to ensure that conditional access policies and everything, right? These are some of the elements that you need to understand from a security architecture perspective. Your organization plans to move their on-prem services to the cloud. How do you want to assure that your self-developed apps like workloads you have, your workload subscriptions, whatever the cloud preference you have, you want to host everything. Now, let's say your organization have the strategy that from today onwards, we plan to shut down our data centers. We would move everything to cloud, like infrastructure as services. You as an architect are assigned to get this transformation done. Of course, it's not going to happen in next 15 days. It is a strategic approach. It's going to take few years to achieve. But before it is delivered, your job is to provide a pattern so that it can be created. So You can simply advise as an architect that these are the mandates you need to deliver. These are the things you have to avoid, right? You need to create certain patterns around that. What are the assured services? Let's take AWS as an example. You want to use AWS. Okay, what are the components within the AWS you can use? You can use, let's say, DynamoDB. You can use your API gateway. You can have the SNSD messaging services, right? You can have the MQ. You can have all this kind of. You can have the direct connect or secure share, whatever the things, right? All those AWS services that you have, or the WAF or guard duty, right? You need to come up with a proper pattern. In case if you're using these assured services, in case if you're following these patterns, this is where you can easily lift and shift your workloads to the cloud. In case if you are not following these, in case if you're following one of these services which are not assured, well, I think we would have a problem. What you're delivering. Um, I like the analogy. You go to airport, right? When the in the customs, in case if you have to make any kind of a declaration, right? In case if you don't have to make any declaration, you can go through the green gate, right? In case if you have some of the declaration, you need to make sure that you go through the red gate. A very similar kind of a pattern you can follow into these kind of a services. You have all the assured services, you're meeting all the patterns. Here you go. You don't have to worry too much about it. In case if you don't have these patterns, you need to make sure that you have to go ahead and verify, get it assured. In case if it leads to any kind of a security risk or other elements, you need to document it. Next one is design DevSecOps. I think we spoke about this. Design DevSecOps solution design addressing concerns around usage of open source libraries, products, codes, container images, cloud first approach. How do you deliver that? So how do you secure an entire pipeline? You need to design everything. You might want to show your developers your code repository, then you might want to scan the code repository, then you move your code to the CI tools like your Jenkins and other elements. You have your Bamboo, Ansible, Chef, and all the whatever the tools that you're using, right? Sonar, Cube, and everything. Through these, you need to assure it. The moment it reaches before it gets deployed, you might want to incorporate some of the scans at the runtime in case if there are any feedback you'll be providing to the developers again. At the same time, you might want to use some of the software composition analysis, SCA tools that can evaluate the open source libraries, images, or the packages, or maybe SBOMs, the software bill of materials and everything. And the container image assurance, in case if you have any container images, you might want to secure them. You should only download the images from trusted registry. Do not use any kind of vulnerable images in the runtime environment, and so on, right? These kind of a patterns, these kind of designs need to be built. Honestly, these are slightly difficult questions, right? But at the same time, this demonstrate the actual mindset of an architect. All right. Okay. What would take anyone to become a security architect? This is something, it's a very generic thing. I have spoken about this on many different occasions. How do we pave the path for becoming a security architect? Have a good understanding of every domains in security. As I explained, you need to be jack of all trades rather than being master of one. And SMEs of one domain, it's not a very desired role nowadays. Because if you, I'll give one example. I did mention I started my career as an into identity and access management, right? Majority of the things that I used to do 17 years ago, they all have been automated. So if I would have been an SME of that thing, I would have been unemployed, right? My job would have been redundant. And especially the AI coming into the place, I think we have to be little bit more careful and cautious. Not saying that AI is going to replace us. I am not saying that, right? But at the same time, the elements which are repeatable, everything that one person can do over and over and over again, and if there is a scope of automating that, that will happen. So that's the reason I suggested that keep your domain versatile, because you as an architect will be needed everywhere, right? Look at the bigger picture. It resonates with what we discussed in a couple of slides ago. So you remember, it's not about your role, it's about knowing your business, knowing your domain. It's very important. If you have a larger picture of your significance of the role, why you're doing this, how you're supporting your business, that will provide more clarity. Soft skills are equally important as technical skills. The first question I asked was, how would you explain a complicated topic as if you're explaining it to a 10-year-old kid? This is a very important trait. I deal with people who have zero technical knowledge, zero security knowledge, or in case if I deal with the domain architects of a specific business, they have a good understanding of technology. They were like 20 years old, 20 years of experience into development, 10 years of experience into architecture, those 30 years, 35 years of experience into the technology and architecture. They have phenomenal understanding in technology, but they're not very equipped with security knowledge. So when you talk, use a language that they understand rather than using, oh, we're going to do the key rotation once it hits the crypto period. You say, what? That's going to be reaction if you don't explain it in a language that they can comprehend. Understand how to navigate through people reluctance, because people are going to push back. People will challenge your thoughts. Hold your ground very firm if you know what you're saying is right. But at the same time, please do not have a black and white discussion. Security is never black and white. It might be black and white for other domains, but not for architecture. Architecture, there's a big gray area. There's a lot of ambiguity. In case if some business reaches out to you that, hey, this is what we want to do, and if you realize that this is not an appropriate way, you cannot simply say, oh no, we can't deliver that. You need to find out the middle ground supporting the business. Always remember this. To whatever extent you can, you have to do that. Stick to the basic fundamentals. Like I said, even if you can become an expert into blockchain, into AI, into emerging technology like your quantum computing or post quantum cryptography, whatever it is, the fundamentals never change. It would still remain the same. Everything revolves around the confidentiality, integrity, availability, everything, right? Is there any kind of a benchmark for us to become an architect? No. Anyone can become an architect. Of course, there's no as such rule book. Now, someone asked me a question. Can anyone become an architect just after crossing college? Well, I would say it's too early, right? There are other domains in security that you can join as a fresher. But architecture is something I would say spend some time. It will help you. Not that you can't, of course you can. But I would say it will be a slight misfit because you would be expected to deliver a lot, designing the patterns, designing the solution. And I don't think anyone would do justice to their job, to their own career if they end up landing that, right? Unless the organization is very flexible, where they are not very demanding, they are not considering they're going to give you a very relaxation period of 2 to 3 years to gradually become an architect. Oh, well, that's a very nice organization to work with. But I would say spend at least 5 7 years. That's a very important thing. Grab some of the certification. Now, some people generally asks that what kind of a certification is mandatory or important for an architect. There's no as a certification you have to do it, but I would say at least have CISSP. CISSP doesn't open any kind of a doors of opportunity for becoming an architect, but it will give you a clarity of everything that happens in security, right? I have worked with people who have like who are great architects and they don't have CSSP certification, but they learned everything on the job. They were coming from a very hardcore technical background and they transitioned themselves from last 10 15 years. They are into an architecture, right? But they don't have CSSP certification, which is absolutely fine. Just in case if you are not one of those who have already transitioned into security architecture, I would say this certification will help you. After this, nothing is mandatory. Everything is an optional. You can do as per your own need and necessity, right?